And hello, everyone. We're starting our session about non-tariff barriers. I'll be hosting the session, and Terry Walmsley from University of Southern California and Impact Econ will be chairing. Over to you, Terry.
Thank you. We've got an interesting session here on NTMs. So we look at sort of global value chains and institutional efficiency and have an input-output analysis on Brazil. So it looks like a good session, and I'm looking forward to it. So the first presenter is Nyango Bryce Sadu, and it's on global value chains in West Africa and does trade facilitation matter. So over to you, Bryce. I haven't got your presentation up yet, so do you want to share it?
Yes, I can. Let me
share button in the bottom.
Yeah, the screen. Can you see now?
You can see, yes. Just need to. Perfect. Looks great. Okay. So you'll have 20 minutes, and then Zeynep will give you a 2-minute warning, and then we'll move on to a discussion. So please go.
Oh, I can start.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you to give me the floor today to present our paper on global value chain in West Africa and the issue of trade facilitation. So the topic is global value chain in West Africa, does trade facilitation matter? So I am Brice Adou, and I'm from the University of Félix Houphouët-Boigny here in Abidjan, Côte d'Ivoire. And I'm glad to present today in the 47th session of the 24th annual GTAP conference. So let me proceed. Okay. The outline of our presentation will be declined into these points. Introduction, we will do a quick literature review with data and methodology. We present the descriptive analysis, the main result, and then we will conclude. As an introduction, we can say that there is an increased level of the global value chain into the global trade statistics. And especially, we saw that global value chain appear to be crucial both for growth and also productivity in both in developed and developing countries. As we'll show in the next figure, we saw that at least we had 38% in 1970s, the share of global value chains into the global trade statistics, but we turned into around 50%. That was statistics from the World Development Report 2019. We also saw that it's efficient to relocate production. So here we try to generate, or we try to talk about the source of that relocation of the production. And theoretically, it has been shown that there is a relocation of production as long as the service cost goes down. So we have now in the world production which can be made in different parts in the world, but this is possible because the transportation costs that we all encompass here as a service cost, as long as they go down. So theoretically, we present the switching theory, also reinforce the discussion between trade facilitation and also duration of trade. So this was the figure 1 I was mentioning related to. So we can see that there is no pointer. Yes, I can, I think. From here, we were down 40%, but since the 2000, we saw a constant growth. And even if it reduced some here back, but we are still under the 45-50% of the global trade statistics. So here we also notice that the time to trade, the time a trade relationship survive is also shorter. Basically, what we try to mention here, it's like trading partners, the trade relationship between two partners reduced a lot. But we have also two parts of a trade. We have the final good trade and also the intermediate goods trade. This is now involving in the global value chain, the intermediate form of the goods. So we also mentioned that reforms appear to be important to facilitate those movements, both for final goods and also intermediate goods. So in this paper, we analyze the determinant of export survival for intermediate products in selecting economies within West Africa. So theoretically, we relate to the new trade theories and also the production location, which is the fragmentation theory, came out by Jones, formally enumerated by Jones, who was before mentioned by Krugman, I think 1980. So the fragmentation theory typically said that the production process is made in different blocks, as long as I said, services can allow that and have some efficiency to link those different blocks. We also noticed from the literature that the role of intermediate goods are also important for the global production network. Theoretically, we base this study on three different theories, such as the product cycle theory, the station matching theory, and the product switching theory. We mentioned, as wrote here in 2003, saying that trade duration depends on buyers' behavior on the international market. Okay, I don't want to confuse here because we typically focus only on intermediate goods. So we also mentioned from the literature that the trade facilitation is an important factor in international trade besides taxes, and that was a study conducted by SEC in 2016. It's important both in developed and developing country, but more in developing country. We also decline two groups of trade facilitation, meaning the soft and the hard infrastructure trade facilitation. For example, we have Boudet in 2012 who captured the total number of days required to clear all procedure from an exporting and importing use. They just use that as a proxy of trade facilitation. So we have numerous indicators in the for trade facilitation. We'll discuss that in the data part. But we have also other determinants such as market access, real GDPs, that will help us, and institution also that will help us capture the effect of trade facilitation on the global value chain that we want here. For the methodology, we are using a survival analysis. Here we try to describe a bit the survival function, which typically try to trace the relationship between two countries which are exchanging like one origin and one destination. We try to trace actually that specific products that we call intermediate products, how they behave between those partners. We also define the conditional probability as in equation 2 that linked directly the hazard rate to all the cover rates, both time varying and time invariant cover rate. We also add some set of Dewey variable as is made in the literature. So we will focus on equation 4. Sorry, I haven't noticed them, but we have here the survival, the hazard rate actually linked to the facilitation, the trade facilitation variables, and we also add other variables. For the data, we took data from the one integrated trade solution for at the 6th level of classification. Like this is only for goods related to the classes for 94 to 84 to 92. Yes, those are the goods who link to the production, the global production network. We also use gravity variables. We also use institutional data. Those institutional came from two sources. One is from the World Governance Indicator from the World Bank, and the other is for International Country Risk Guide. We use our Trade Facilitation Index from the World Bank, United Nations, actually UNESCAP. Those that institution provides a very rich database on trade facilitation. We have to mention also here that the best candidate for trade facilitation was the WTO one trade facilitation agreement. But for the study we are conducted here, it's only captured 2 here, so it was going to be very difficult for us to use them. So we rely on that database. In terms of descriptive analysis, when we run the Kaplan-Meier estimates graphs, we showed that 43% of spell reach the second year. It means when countries start trading for the first year, only 43 of them reach the second year. So there are also a lot of the percentage of these trade relationships will die along the way. We also try to make differentiation about where those countries came from, and we noticed that ECOWAS countries like West African countries are not fully integrated in the global value chain related to the East Asian countries. Here we don't show a statistic, but for them, the trade try to survive longer than for the countries that we use here. And we also note that exporting huge volume are more stable. That is just confirming the theory. We here show 2 graphs. This is the first one, which is also in the figure B, trying to explain a bit, trying to make the differentiation between the income level of the partner countries. This is also the difference that I was making. Okay, here we just say that the 4 countries we use some kind of selection pattern, like we use countries which are coastal and also above some kind a certain economic growth along the 20 recent years. So also how they perform in the export market. So we try to capture all those factors and select those 4 countries. Okay, here we don't present them, but those are the 4 countries. When we reference them, we talk about West Africa because they're all based in West Africa. So as a result, we say that speaking the same language actually helps countries to integrate easily in the global value chain. By that, we say that they can have a strong tie, if I can say that. Like, of course, we know that global value chain involves goods that cross borders. So as long as you share the same language, for example, speaking the same language, it's easy for the goods to cross many countries, and those countries have value. So they have at the end, some kind of strong relationship about the trade ties. We also find that in terms of tariff-based trade facilitation measure, they do not help for trade duration. But the non-tariff one, which is an equivalent, also at this time we find that they help continue trading for the selected country that we have. Here I try to show some results. Strangely, we have inflation. Here it's the initial reference to initial volume of trades between 2 partners when they start trading. And this is the second step of our regression, where we show also the importance of institution and also the kind of trades, can I say cooperation of communities. Yeah, we try to find 2 communities, especially ECOWAS and WEMU. We found that being in those 2 communities can also help improving the participation in the global value chain. Of course, we know that the trading the countries that we have, their main trading partners are outside the region. But even though being on the region, it can still allow those countries to have very strong trade relationship. Of course, many can say there are other factors like historical and others, but here we try to only mention the fact to be on those regional group. Here we also show that one of the key finding here is also about corruption. Corruption do not improve the trade relationship, the duration of the trade, because we have past studies who used to mention that corruption, especially in Africa, tend to improve the way business is doing. But here we just show that this is not the case, especially for intermediate goods. So that was the result I was showing. We can conclude by saying that this paper was investigating the link between trade facilitation and global value chain participation. We show that trade relationships are still do not survive for long, but they are better than other countries when you consider other country export for other countries. And we note that also in terms of policy recommendation, that the policy makers actually should focus to improve both tariff and non-tariff trade barriers, and also relying more on international coordination. And the new African Continental Free Trade Agreement is also a good framework for all African countries to try to enhance also discussion about the place of a trade facilitation in to help actually Africa boosting their participation in the global value chain. We know actually that the paper has some limits about the data used. We was very interesting to use like family level data that we couldn't get for all the countries. And we can say now thank you for your attention, and we are ready for comments and questions. I will let the floor here. Thank you very much.
Wonderful, thank you. That was really interesting. Some very interesting results. Shame that the FTAs actually seem to decrease it. Okay, are there any questions? So as I said, maybe you can just indicate in the chat that you might have a question, and and then we'll let you actually speak your question rather than trying to write it out very quickly. Little congratulatory message. Oh, Zainab, sure.
Hi, Bryce. Thank you for the excellent presentation. I think I have a clarifying question. I might have missed it. Could you comment on where in the empirical analysis you have the regulatory governance, doing business, and you know, the number of days that is required for it needs to be custom cleared, the paperwork. Could you clarify that? Thanks.
Yes, actually, as I said, we have some kind of improvement in terms of reforms. Okay, what I know better is our countries where we are now in Ivory Coast. We know a lot of effort has been made by the International Trade Center and also the WTO to try to reduce the time, for example, a good came from the manufacturing to go to the seaport and also going abroad. So there are substantial effort we have been doing, but there are many things to do again. There are a lot of room to improve. Okay, for example, one of the key, can I say, assessment was the COVID time. During the COVID time, we know during the COVID time, movement was so it was only goods were supposed to move freely. But for that, we also had a lot of difficulties in terms of export, for example, because we notice that, of course, like the reforms are there, regulatories are there, norms and everything are there, but in the implementation now, in the application, that's cause a bit of it's a bit challenging, because I'm aware of a project from the FDB here, who is trying to also improve that time of exporting or even importing, like everything related to trades. There is a ongoing project for that, actually, not only for the country, but in the coastal, if I can say, coastal West Africa, like Ivory Coast, Togo, Ghana, and Nigeria. Yeah.
Thank you.
I don't know if I answered to a question. I don't know.
So I have two questions. The first one, I just wondered what the survival rates were for other countries. It'd be interesting to see that 43% relative to. So what is it in Latin America? What is it in Asia, East Asia? Can you put some perspective on that? And then I have another question, but maybe I'll let you answer that one first.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for that question. I think here we haven't shown detailed information about those countries, but we use them as can I say contrafactual if the word is not so big? Okay. So for North America, we find in the literature a study from Mercedes. It was, especially for the US, it was, I think, 34% for the study has done. And for Asia, we have that study we mentioned earlier, Obashi, who now made the difference between, like, when you take the goods global, I mean, both intermediate and final goods. I think he's going also, I don't remember well, but it ranged between, I think, 20 and 40 and 30%. But also, as I said, it clearly depends on the volume also of the goods. Because as long as there is a lot of volume in the initial of the trade relationship, the relationship tend to live. Because there is a lot of exit and entry, actually, in the international trade. Yes, please, the second question.
Yeah, they're done as I guess it's fairly aggregate as well, HS6, for that type of thing. And then the other question I just wanted to ask is whether there were specific sectors or specific countries that it was worse with, and I guess that might be a way of working out whether it is more of a data issue. Yeah. So can you tell whether there's specific sectors or specific countries that it's lower with, or is it just generally?
Yes. Okay. I hope I have some time.
I'm sorry. Yeah, go on.
I hope. Okay, no problem. So here, the sector we focus on was especially everything related to industrial machineries, parts and components. Okay, because if we go, for example, I've made a study who's going to coming soon, I think published soon. So in this study, we also noticed that when we take like the broad sector, especially for the countries here, we are main exporters of raw materials and agricultural products, what we call homogeneous products. So for that, you will find like the survival rate can go up to 50, 60, thereabouts. Because those are the strong relationship type. Like you just decided to export, like say, to Switzerland, and yes, that it is. There is nothing depending up and down. We will still continue to. Now, when we go for actually pharmaceutical sectors, we also discover that when it's about the trade among Africans, we export a lot of pharmaceutical products from, I take an example, from Ivory Coast to Ghana, from Ivory Coast to Nigeria, from Ivory Coast to Niger, or Ivory Coast to Burkina Faso. Yes. But when it's specific to apart from that, like manufacturing goods, like final goods, we are doing very poorly. And I checked yesterday, for example, I checked the statistics. You find that, okay, I took one example. I don't know if it can invite the discussion and answer the question. When you take, for example, a country like Ivory Coast, no, Ghana, it was Ghana I checked. You take Ghana, you take and you try to find on the MIT Atlas book, what are the main countries where Ghana export to in terms of machinery or those things. You find that, okay, you will find Ivory Coast first, you find Nigeria, most of our countries. But when you look at the volume of trade, it's about 5, sometimes 10, or depending on the years, you find 5, I can say 5 to 25 million of dollars. When you now take the other side, like, okay, this is what we export. What is now Ghana import in terms of those products? You will find that all of them are either the US or China or European Union, and the volume, it's about 1 billion. And those 3 parts of the world share that market. So there is a lot of room for improvement, for example, but we do not focus on that. That's why we believe that these African trade, free continental trade, is a key framework for us to identify those sectors and also going there. But we know we can't go just like that. We should have some kind of facilitation of trade, like incentive in terms of trade facilitation, so that we can also improve and enrich, boosting actually trade in those specific sectors and countries. Yeah.
Great. Okay. Any other questions from anyone? Okay. Nope. Okay. So can I ask you to stop sharing? And
yes, I'm not looking how to do that.
So if
yes, the red button up. Sorry, it went up.
Yeah, you have to go up and sort of
stop sharing. Okay, sorry.
That's okay. No problem. So do we have Roland here?
I don't see him.
I don't see him either. Okay. So we will go on to our third presentation, which is Damaris Lopez Afonso, and it's on the impacts of institutional efficiency on trade in developed and developing countries. So that sounds interesting. Institutional efficiency. So I will hand it over to Damaris, and
okay.
If you can load up the presentation,
I'm going to share.
Great.
You all seen?
Yes. Looks good.
Okay. My name is Damaris. I'm a PhD student in economics from Federal University of Juiz de Fora in Brazil, and I will present the paper entitled Impacts of Institutional Efficiency on Trade in Developed and Developing Countries, co-authored by Professor Susana, Fernando, and Admir. Okay. Much is discussed in the literature about the determinants of international trade, which include the different levels of productivity between countries, the factoring down the difference in factoring downs. But around the year 2000, the empirical literature has given attention to the impact of institutions on trade. Linders classifies the institutional impact on trade as an intangible barrier, different from tangible barriers such as transportation costs and tariffs, and linked to uncertainties in an interaction between agents. These uncertainties are difficult to attribute to measure, such as the likelihood of theft, non-fulfillment contracts, from where the intangibility derives. These uncertainties originate so-called transaction costs, which, according to Douglas North, consist on the cost of measuring the valuable attributes of what is being exchanged and the cost of right protection, monitoring, and contracts enforcement. According to North and Thomas, an efficient institutional structure would guarantee the necessary rules for a well-defined proper rights system and an effective contract enforcement apparatus, which could reduce transaction costs in the economy. Based on North's approach, the efficiency of institutions is seen as a determinant factor of nations' economic development. For the author, the existence of efficient institutions would stimulate the agents to invest in more differentiated products like manufactured sectors, boosting any trade, not only in trade, in production, but in trade of manufactured sectors, boosting economic development of the countries. This article aims to contribute to the empirical literature by assessing the institutional efficiency impact on non-manufactured and manufactured sectors in developed and developing countries. Our analysis is composed of two empirical strategies. First, we estimate the institutional impact, the institutional efficient impact on exports using a gravity model. Second, we use GTAP model to analyze the transaction costs, broad effects associated with these exports, which, in our analysis, increase the import price paid by partner countries' importers using AMS variable. The log linear specification of the gravity model is given by equation 1, where we regress exports by distance, GDP per capita of exporting, GDP per capita of importing, tariffs, bilateral tariffs between countries, and two distinct indicators of institutional efficiency. Our estimates were made separately by non-manufactured sectors and manufactured sectors, and by developed and developing countries. We used the ordinary least square method with fixed effects of import and export. And how our estimates were made in log-log, the coefficients are constant measures related to the independent variable. And we only captured the positive trade flows without considering zero trade flows. But it doesn't represent a source of bias for us, since our objective is to analyze the transactions effectively carried out that can involve transaction costs. But we also provide some estimates using at the end of this presentation. Our database is provided from 2009 to 2014 years, the period post-financial crisis of 2008, institutional efficiency was measured by two distinct indicators: rule of law of the worldwide governance indicators and proper rights of the Reddit Foundation. Both indicators measure the guarantee of private property rights, the execution of contracts, and reliability and independence of the judicial system in the exporting countries. The exports and tariffs variables were given by World Integrated Trade Solution, and the distance variable comes from CIP II. The exporting countries correspond to 120 countries disaggregated in the GTAP model, and were classified as developed or developing countries according to the United Nations criteria. The importing countries include the exporting countries, developing countries, and the other countries aggregated in the GTAP model, which aggregated in the regions in the GTAP model, which was named the rest of the world. Our regional aggregation follows developed and developing countries in the so-called rest of the world region, and our sector aggregation follows non-manufactured, manufactured, and rest of the sectors, which are mostly services not tradables. GTAP has a specific variable, AMS, which is similar to an exogenous technological shock that changes import prices and therefore can lead to a change in export supply without incurring additional costs. We used AMS variable to simulate the transaction costs associated with the exports. Okay. The AMS has a negative sign in equations 2 and 3, and because of that, for example, a negative shock in AMS implies an increase in import prices applied to a specific sector from a specific exporter destined for the import. This encourages these imports and exports. But because of the general equilibrium model's nature, the change in import price impact not only these specific sectors and regions, but also all regions and all sectors in the GTAP, in the GTAP model. This table shows the descriptive statistics of the gravity model, where we can see that developed countries present a high average of the export volume, mainly from manufactured sectors compared to developing countries. Another result of interest is the high average of rule of law and property rights indicators for developed countries compared to developing countries, which are approximately 100% higher in developed countries. This table shows the estimates from the gravity model using OLS with fixed effects of import and export. We can see that institutional efficiency had a negative impact on manufactured exports of developing countries. In other words, the low institutional efficiency of developing countries negatively affect their manufactured exports. On the other hand, developed countries, the institutional efficiency indicator had no statistical significant impact. Almost all variables of the gravity model got expected and significant values. And we can say that the lowest average impact of institutional efficiency on manufactured exports of developing countries is minus 0.12%. And we consider that the institutional efficiency of developing countries is 100% lower than that present developed countries. And we consider this like transaction costs associated with manufactured exports of developing countries. And multiplying these values, we can say that institutional inefficiency of developing countries negatively affect their manufactured exports in 12%. For achieving a 12% drop in manufactured exports of developing countries, we applied a negative shock of 7.23% in AMS variables. The shock was applied on manufactured exports of developing countries to all GTAP regions, developed countries, developing countries and rest of the world. The driving effect of the orders was the rise in import prices that was greater in developed countries, because the rise in import price, including in developing countries. And table 4, I will check. Table 4 shows the variation in exports, production, and imports. And our interest was to drop the exports of developing countries in manufacturing sector by 12%. And the other exports of developing countries in non-manufacturing sector and the rest of the sector increased. And because the raise in import price of manufacturing sectors, the regions creates an incentive for substitution of imports in the sector for a domestic production, which was higher in developed countries. We also can say that developing countries experience a comparative advantage in non-manufacturing sectors and in the rest of the sectors due to the positive transaction costs associated with their manufactured exports. On the other hand, developed countries and the rest of the world presented a drop in their non-manufactured exports in the rest of the sector exports and production in these sectors, and raised their imports in these sectors, in the same sectors. The variation in exports, imports, and production had an impact on GDP of the regions, which was negative only for developing countries, around 4%. And another result of interest were the welfare variations, which for this shock derives mainly from the technological effect, because our shock was applied in AMS variable. Let me check. Sorry. Yes, because the presence of transaction costs on exports of manufacturing sectors from developing countries decrease their productivity, and it has an indirect effect in other regions through their increase in import prices. The welfare variations were positive only for developed countries, mainly due to the variation in terms of trade of this region. And the other regions of the model had welfare losses. In conclusion, we observe that the low institutional efficiency of developing countries is a factor that limits their performance in international trade. And in addition to other factors that affect trade, institutions should be considered key players by policymakers, since institutions can impact the reliability of transactions and the incentive structure of the agents to invest and trade more complex products, like manufactured products. This table shows the estimate of gravity model using Poisson zero maximum likelihood in the same period, where we can observe the positive relationship between the high institutional efficiency of developed countries with their manufactured exports and the low institutional efficiency of developing countries with their non-manufactured exports. Yes, thank you very much. I finished.
Thank you very much. That was really interesting. It's great to see gravity and CG modeling combined. Does anyone have any questions? Zeynep, yep.
Thank you, Damaris.
Thank you.
for this wonderful presentation. And I echo Terry about seeing gravity and CG together. It's so good to bridge that gap. And my question is about that gap, actually. And you mentioned that you have given a shock to AMS variable, and it was 7.23%. I wanted to ask you about how you translated your empirical results to the numerical AMS shock. Thank you. And you're muted, I think.
You're muted. We can't hear you. Yep.
Can you hear now? Sorry. This shock was achieved by proportionally. First, we applied a positive, a negative shock of 1% EMS verbs, and we observed how the exports of developing countries in manufacturing sectors varied, changed. And so we achieved this value, 7.23%, by proportionally in this parameter. Okay?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yep. So it sounds like it was semi-calibrated to get what you end up doing. Yeah, I had a similar question. So I think Bryce had a question as well.
Yes, it's more clarifying question. I just want to thank also Damaris for this presentation. I just have a quick question about the level of aggregation of the data. Is it at 6 level, at 4 level? If it matters or not, she can also mention. And also another small question is the fact of the issue of re-exportations. I don't know if the study also capture, or if I can say partial out, the issue of re-exportation, because there are some countries who are just import to re-export. They are not actually, I don't know if also the model can also take that into account. Thank you, Mr.
I will share my screen again, that you can show my regional and sector aggregation. And non-manufacturing sectors were basically the sectors that didn't have a level of persistent, I think. And the rest of the sector were mostly services. Developed countries and developed countries, we classified according to 9H criteria, and the rest of the world were mostly aggregation regions of the GTAP model. And our database, our variables of exporting countries. Yes, our exporting countries in the gravity model correspond to these developed and developing countries. And this export was made not only for exports for developed countries and developed countries, but also for the other countries. We took this statistic on World Integrated Trade Solution. And these other regions include the rest of the world in our database. For example, countries that pertains for the rest of the world. I think I answered the question or not.
Oh yes, thank you.
Thank you very much.
So I have, I guess, one very small question and then one suggestion. So the question is, I missed what log property was.
Property rights indicator.
Oh, property rights. Okay. Yep. I just wanted to check. So as I said, It was a really small question. Not a problem. And then the other thing is, I just wonder whether AMS is the right variable to shock. And I was just thinking it might be worth having a look at a paper on in the GTAP journal that went out just recently, looking at different methods for implementing NTMs. I don't. Yeah, it's something I wrote. That
Thank you.
AMS is very much good for the importer, and it seems to me as though institutional improvements or non-improvements should be put on the exporter side.
Okay.
So rather than putting it on AMS, you might put it on something like TXS or.
Yes. We decided to put the shock in AMS because the gravity model, the theoretical gravity model of the Anderson and Van Cook also simulates the changes in import price for the importer perspective.
Yes.
But we also think about for the shock in AXS. Thank you very much for your comment. Maybe we can put it together, the shock for another perspective.
You can calibrate it in a similar way to which you did this way. So but I agree, it's a little difficult because the gravity models are based on AMS. But yeah, you end up giving all the gains to the importer, and I think in this particular case.
Thank you very much, Darren. It's a pleasure to contact you.
Yes, absolutely. Go for it. Okay, great. Two great presentations so far. So our third presenter is Teus, and okay, so Teus is actually doing an input-output analysis on the case of foot and mouth disease in Brazil, which sounds interesting as well. That's some good presentations. So, Teus, if you want to load up your presentation, and we'll hand it over to you.
Good morning, everyone. I'll stop my video because my internet connection is not so good, but I'll come back. Can you see my screen?
We can, yep.
Okay. So my name is Thais. You can call me Christina if you prefer, because I know my name is a little different. And I am a PhD student in applied economics at the University of São Paulo in Brazil. And I'm here today to present my paper named Input-Output Analysis, the case of foot and mouth disease in Brazil. I'm very happy to be here today to have this opportunity to present at the GTAP conference. It's my first time here, so thank you. And well, here we have a quick outline of my presentation. So let's get started. Brazil is the largest country in Latin America, and it is the largest exporter of beef and the second largest producer of cattle in the world. Among the Brazilian states, we have Mato Grosso do Sul, located in the western region of Brazil, on the border with Paraguay and Bolivia. And this state represents 10% of the national cattle herd, and it is one of the biggest beef exporters. Despite presenting an increasing volume of exports of beef and pork, the Brazilian livestock sector has shown a certain fragility in face of the demands imposed by large importing markets. And Brazil faces several barriers to its exports. More specifically, Brazilian meats face tariff and non-tariff barriers that influence their commercialization in the international market. And among these restrictions are those related to foot and mouth disease. But what is foot and mouth disease? Well, it is a highly infectious animal disease that affects cloven-hoofed animals. And once found in the previously free country, strict control measures are implemented to eradicate it, including the sanitary slaughter of animals and restriction to the movement of animals, animal products, people, and objects susceptible to contamination, and restrictions on international trade of animals and animal products are imposed on the country in crisis until it regains its disease-free status. So the last outbreak of foot-and-mouth disease in Brazil was in Mato Grosso do Sul. It started in September 2005 and ended in April 2006. 58 countries imposed restrictions on Brazilian beef and pork exports, and these countries represented around 87% of Brazil's meat export market. A few years later, Brazil, in 2018, Brazil was internationally recognized as FMD-free country. Then in 2019, Brazil started the suspension of vaccination against foot-and-mouth disease, and it's been going on until today. Therefore, issues related to foot-and-mouth disease are currently under discussion in the country. And in this sense, this paper tries to answer the question, what would be the impact of a FMD outbreak in Brazil, assuming a reduction in exports of beef and pork from Mato Grosso do Sul as the same observed in the last outbreak? To answer this question, we use a database given by the input-output matrix for the year 2015, prepared from the tables of resources and uses published by the Brazilian government. And the data in this matrix provide a detailed view of the Brazilian productive structure, allowing to assess the degree of sectorial interconnection of the economy, as well as the impact of variations in the final demand for products. This paper uses the matrix disaggregated into 67 sectors and 127 products. In addition, we use data on exports from Brazil. More specifically, we selected data on exports of beef and pork. The data were consulted according to the Mercosur Common Nomenclature Codes because they allow for a greater level of detail than the harmonized system, since they have 8 digits of detail. And several studies evaluate the potential economic impacts of FMD outbreaks in different countries. One of the most common approaches for this assessment are the input-output models, but we don't have studies for Brazil using this approach. And so this paper is based on the instructions of Miller and Blair to build and analyze the input-output model for the Brazilian economy. And given the objective of analyzing the impacts on a reduction in beef and pork exports on the Brazilian economy, the final demand for each product was considered exogenous to the model. So here we have these variables. With the necessary derivations that you can see at Miller and Blair, we can translate shocks in the final demand for products. We can translate this into shocks in the final demand of the economy in this. Thus, it is possible in this way to analyze variations in the production value of sectors, employment, GDP, etc. Shocks on the input-output model were calculated in 2 different ways. We applied shocks in the same variables, but we calculated them in 2 ways to compare if there would be big differences. In shock 1, we considered, we calculated the proportion in which exports of beef and pork from Mato Grosso do Sul fell between 2005 and 2006, the last outbreak. This proportion was applied to the value of exports in 2014. And the result indicates how much exports in 2014 would fall in case of a FMD outbreak like the one in 2006. This drop in exports was subtracted from the exports that actually happened in 2015, showing the magnitude of the negative shock to be applied in the input-output model. We consider that the behavior of exports would be the same as that observed in the last outbreak. The same calculation was made for beef and pork. Then in shock 2, we consider that the closure of specific markets that imported beef and pork from Mato Grosso do Sul between 2005 and 2006. Most of these markets returned to buying products from the state after overcoming the health crisis. Thus, we calculated the proportion in which each of these markets closed for products exported by Mato Grosso do Sul in 2006. This percentage reduction was applied to export from the state for the same countries in 2014, showing what would be the drop in exports in the event of a FMD outbreak in 2014. Again, this reduction in exports is subtracted from the exports that actually took place in 2015, and we obtain a shock approximately 13% smaller than shock 1. We consider that the behavior of the importing markets for the beef and pork from Mato Grosso do Sul would be similar to that observed in 2006. We don't consider the closing of markets conquered after 2006, nor the closing of markets that remained buying animal products from the state, even with the occurrence of FMD in 2006. And here we have the results. So shock 1 consisted of a negative shock of 1.3 billion in exports of beef and 100.28 million in exports of product pork, totaling a fall of 1.4 billion in the vector of final demand for products, and making the transformations to obtain an equivalent shock in the sectors. Here, so the shocks in products were translated into shocks in the sectors. In the final demand, we can see that the final demand in the slaughter and other livestock product sector suffered the greatest negative impact, followed by the sector of other food products, trade, and livestock. The value of national production decreased by approximately 8.1 billion, and the sectors that suffer the greatest impact of production value are slaughter, trade, and livestock. Families had a total income loss of 1.91 billion. Shock 1 had also a negative impact on the GDP of 2.97 billion. Tax revenues presented a negative variation of 247.2 million, and the number of employed people decreased by 68.3 thousand, which corresponds to 0.67% of the total employed people in 2015. Shock 2 was formed by a total negative shock of 1.25 billion applied to the vector of final demand for products of the Brazilian economy. What changes in relation to shock 1 are the values at the level for each sector due to a negative shock 13% smaller than the previous one. All results here in shock 2 are 13% lower than the results of shock 1 due to the linearity of the input model. So shock 1 was 13% greater than shock 2. And the consequences are results for shock 1 13% higher because of this linearity. From the results, it is possible to observe that losses in the value of production are equivalent to approximately 5.6 times the value of the shocks in the final demand of the economy. In other words, the direct shocks to beef and pork exports caused by FMD outbreak could have a negative effect of almost 6 times greater on the Brazilian economy. This multiplier effect can be explained by several factors determined by the existing relations between the sectors of the Brazilian economy. And a possible cause of this effect can be given by the high Hirschman-Rasmussen connection rates of the sectors most significantly affected by shocks in final demand. This is because the linkages between sectors promote impeller effects on the economy. Some sectors, due to their connectedness with others, are able to drive growth or crisis in other sectors. And among the sectors in Table 3, the sector of slaughter and other livestock products, one of the most affected by the shocks, stands out for its high rate of backward connection, which may indicate that in the event of a shock, the sector significantly affects the sectors from which it demands inputs. The reduction in GDP caused by the shock seems small compared to the greatness of Brazil's economy. However, making a comparison with the budget executed for agricultural defense in 2015, it is possible to more fully assess the dimension of the shocks proposed in this study. In 2015, the Ministry of Agriculture, Livestock and Supply spent approximately 91.8 million on activities related to agricultural defense. The variation in GDP caused by shock 1 is 32 times greater than this budget. That is, considering only the impacts of foot-and-mouth disease outbreaks on exports, the losses to the Brazilian economy would be significantly greater than the annual expenses with the prevention of animal diseases. This value could be even higher if other losses caused by FMD were considered, such as animal slaughter and costs to control and eradicate outbreaks. It's really high. And so finally, the results show that adverse events to animal health can cause significantly economic impacts, losses, reducing not only the value of production, GDP, and revenue, but also the number of jobs and household incomes. Furthermore, the results show the importance of promoting investments in agricultural defense in order to prevent the entry and spread of animal diseases in Brazil. And we can see that ensuring health status free of several animal diseases is essential for Brazil to guarantee its access to the international market and maintain its position as an important meat exporter to the rest of the world. Although having some relevant results, this study has some limitations, such as the type of closure. The way to calculate the shocks may have led to the overestimation. The model is not interregional, so we had to apply the shock in the Brazilian economy and not specifically for the state of Mato Grosso do Sul. The model does not allow the analysis of substitution effects, and it doesn't allow price-related adjustments. And finally, we considered only one type of economic shock caused by FMD outbreaks, but as I said before, there are many other negative shocks that we could apply to this scenario. Anyway, there is still much to be done in the economic modeling of the losses caused by FMD outbreaks, especially in Brazil, where there are just few studies on this topic, especially on the economic side. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Teus. That was great. A good example for my students of where you need lots of detailed information to get, and also of an NTM. So questions. Open it up for questions. Does anyone have any questions? No? Okay, I'll ask a couple and then come back and ask again if some people have thought about them. So I was wondering if it would be possible to compare to actual. So if there was this shock in early 2004, I can't remember the date exactly, is it possible to run the same shocks on an older input-output database and then see what they look like compared to what actually happened?
Yes, I thought about this, but I didn't do it, but I'll do it after. But one difference is that the input-output matrix for 2006, 2005 it's not so, they don't have many sectors and so many products. So we have some differences in the disaggregation level of sectors and products. But yes, I'm very interested in doing this because we don't know, we are in 2021 and we still don't know what was the dimension of the losses in 2006 of this outbreak. And it is this is kind of a taboo in the Brazilian government. They don't like to talk about the FMD outbreak in 2006. So it's very hard to get data from this time. I don't know even how many animals were slaughtered because they don't like to talk about it. So it's a challenge to do this estimation of losses, but I'll try to do it. And
I didn't mean to add to your list. You probably have a long list of things to do already. But yeah, no.
No,
Okay.
that's great. It would be
to do
very
fast.
interesting because no one knows how much it costed for Brazil.
Oh wow. Okay. And then another question was whether it might be useful to talk about the livestock sector in that region relative to other regions, because I guess the argument could be, is this an average region or is it a very high region? Would it be worse if the foot, because obviously foot and mouth disease doesn't have to come back to exactly the same spot. So is it a big?
I think you're mute.
There's my dog on my lap, so I wonder if he's touched something. Apologies. Yeah. Did you get? I'm not sure. Did you get the question?
Yes. So this is a big state in livestock production, especially cattle. Is the I think it's the third or fourth greatest producer in Brazil. So yeah, we have a lot of animals there. And we have other states. The state of North, that's called Mato Grosso. I study Mato Grosso do Sul, or South Mato Grosso. Yeah, so the state up is the largest producer of cattle, and they have an international border too. And we consider today the international border is represents the higher risk of reintroduction of FMD virus, because we have countries like Venezuela that have the disease. So, and we have a dry border with many countries, and we are not able to control all the animals in the border. So yeah, they pass from like Paraguay to Brazil, from Argentina to Brazil, and vice versa. And well, we have a risk in several states, and the states that are on the border, the international border, they have many animals. They have like millions. In Mato Grosso do Sul, we have one city that has almost 2 million cattle in the border with Bolivia. And we don't know the status of Bolivia, that region. So the Brazilian government even vaccinates animals in the border in other countries to try to prevent the entry of the virus. But yes, we could have a higher impact in other states, but Mato Grosso do Sul is also a great large state. They have a big sector of livestock.
Sounds like a disaster waiting to happen.
Yes, and now we are stopping to vaccinate animals, so they are going to be more susceptible. And this is a problem if you have an outbreak, because animals won't be vaccinated against it, so they will spread it more fast.
Interesting. That's great. I mean, as a CGA modeler, I guess it'd be nice to see it in CGA. That's
yes, actually,
question.
I don't know if you know Professor Amanda Countryman. I'm going to live in Colorado.
Very good.
I'm moving to the US in August, and I'm staying there for 9 months. And I'll work with the GTAP model and foot and mouth disease. So we're going to start working on this.
I look forward to seeing it. That's great.
Thanks.
Does anyone else have any questions? Zeynep.
Hi, Tess. Thanks for the great presentation and congratulations on working with Amanda. She's great.
Thanks.
I echo Terry about the validation exercise. Even if there aren't many sectors, and if you get the data, I mean, I understand why they don't want to talk about that. But even if it's for a limited number of sectors, it's still very valuable to do this validation exercise. And I also want to comment on the CG part, since a lot of the trade agreements now talk about sanitary and phytosanitary measures. It's really important to think about what variable to shock in the CGE model, exporter, importer specific. It has to be bilateral, of course, but the effects on the export side, and in the previous presentation, Terry also mentioned AMS versus AXS. But these are really fixed costs, right? Maybe you could also try and think about a different variable to shock, even in addition to AXS, for example. Just some, it would be great to do some brainstorming exercise on this too. And I have a question about the backward and forward linkages that you presented, the Hirschman index. I'm not very familiar of the literature, so maybe it's a very naive question. I don't know. But so, of course, a lot of the sectors that you showed were round one, except for trade. Trade, there was a very big difference, of course, between backward and forward linkage. So, could you elaborate on that just very quickly? Thank you.
Yes. Well. I don't know how much basic I have to go on this, but if the linkage is more than one, it's higher than one, then it means that the sector has relations to the other sectors above the average of the economy. So they influence other sectors more than the others. And well, if we take the Brazilian economy, it makes sense because we are one of the greatest exporters of agricultural products and other products not manufactured the most, but yes. So trade is one sector that has strong linkages backward because it has this. Well, we're gonna trade, so we have to have some suppliers in the economy, but and then they will influence the sectors that buy from them too. So I don't know if I answered your question, but for the Brazilian economy, it makes sense that trade is very high because of this high commercialization side of the economy. I don't know. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, but I'd like to emphasize that I'm going to work with a CGE model now. And after working with Amanda on the GTAP model, I'm going to work with my advisor here too. He's on GTAP also, Professor Joaquim Bento Ferreira. And we are going to use a Brazilian model for the Brazilian economy. And we will have all the states, so we will be able to shock specifically the state of Mato Grosso do Sul and overcome a lot of limitations that the input-output model has.
Cool, Amanda and Joachim. You'll be an expert by the end of it in CGE.
Well, I hope so, because I'm just starting, so I don't know much of this method, but I'm very happy to have two strong researchers by my side.
Yeah. Joaquim's done a lot of work on Brazil as well. Yeah, over the years, I've known him a long time. That's great.
And I'd like to thank you again for this opportunity. My English is not so good. I'm not so confident, but I'll try to be clear.
Oh no, it's all good. So, any other questions from anyone else? I still don't see Roland, so I guess we'll wrap up. And yeah.
I don't see me either. I don't think that's going to happen.
It's going to happen. No. Okay, wonderful. So yeah, I think it was a great session. So thank you very much for everyone. Thank you to all the presenters. Really interesting topics and interesting ways of looking at them. And yeah, did a bit of everything. I think worked out well. So thank you very much, and have a good rest of day.